Hi there, I'm Vicki PARFENOW. I'm glad you're here. Today I have a project which is watercolouring and changing a stamp image, which is something I really love to do to get more use from my stamps. So I'm going to take this stamp here, which is from Stampin Up, called Daisy Garden, and I am going to put these daisies in a terracotta pot. And I'll show you how easy it is to do that. Now you may be thinking, well, how do I draw a terracotta pot? Every time I try to draw these, they look a bit wonky. So I have a tip for you with some tracing paper, paper snips, and a pencil, so I can show you how to get a completely symmetrical terracotta pot. So you don't need to worry about that. All you need for this project is something to colour everything in with. You could use watercolour markers. I am using watercolour paints, and I've picked my colour scheme for these daisies. So I'm thinking I would like yellow and orange daisies, so perhaps some of my yellows, raw sienna, yellow ochre. I want to do my pot in burnt sienna. I have permanent sap green for the leaves, and I'm probably going to knock that back a bit with some Payne's grey and give it a couple of different shades. And this is the colour scheme, but whatever colours you like would work. Let's get started. The other things that will come in handy would be a paper towel, some watercolour brushes, 2 jars of water, one to put your dirty paint in, one to use as clean water, and some VersaFine Onyx black ink or something that is waterproof. I have some low-tack artist tape from Scotch. You could use masking tape, you could use painter's tape, that would work as well. And as my substrate, I am using some Fabriano 25% cotton, 200 GSM, 90 pounds paper, and I've cut a piece to fit my stamp positioner exactly. So the piece I am using is 6.5 inches by 8.5 inches. So that's the size I'm working with. Actually, yes, that's about right. I think it's slightly under 6.5 on this edge, but I've cut it to fit the inside of my stamp positioner so I can get maximum coverage of my watercolor paper. So this is cold pressed watercolor paper, which means it has a lovely texture, and it will take the valleys of the paint that sit inside it and give a really lovely finish. So paper towels to wipe off on, let's get cracking. So I've positioned this on my stamping positioner towards the top because I want to make enough room for my terracotta pot underneath, and I have it fairly symmetrically centered. I want it about the same distance either side. So I guess about there would be the middle mark, and I'm going to stamp that with my VersaFine ink now. Now I've set this with the heat tool, and I'm going to reference the stamp cover while I'm painting this so that I can see this image, which is very detailed, versus the more watercolor painterly effect of the lovely image that I have here on this paper. But next we need to draw in our terracotta pot, and I'm going to start with some tracing paper. This is just from an A4 sheet of tracing paper that I purchased from my local dollar store. You could use baking paper that you use in the kitchen. It doesn't really matter for this. So I'm going to place this over the top and draw a rough terracotta pot. And I'll show you how you can make this terracotta pot absolutely perfectly symmetrical. There's a really simple trick, and I'll show you how it's done. So I'm going to roughly draw the shape for the top of the pot. This is going to be an oval. In fact, I'm going to make it a little bit wider because I'm going to have the pot slightly tapering towards the base. Then this part here is going to come down straight Then you're going to have a bit of an oval around here again. I might even make that a bit deeper. And then the rest of the pot can come down here. Now you could have it on a saucer. I just don't want to put that much detail into the pot because the drama in this piece is the daisies themselves growing out of the pot. And I think that looks pretty nice. So now that I have that, I'm going to show you how hard it is to get this symmetrical. Now, if you were to just put that pot down, you can see how parts of it are not right. So I'm going to go back to those sketchy lines that I drew first. If you drew all hard lines, you're guaranteed not to get a symmetrical pot. And my pot is still not symmetrical, so I can see this side needs to be a little bit wider to take in the rest of them. And when I'm pretty happy with it, with a very thick line, this is a very thick line, here is the trick. So we can see this part of the pot is slightly curved. This part echoes the same curve. The top echoes the same curve. This is the reverse of the curve in the back, and we've got sloping lines down the sides. Now it's not symmetrical. How do I get it to be symmetrical? Well, I'm going to roughly find the halfway point here. You could measure this, but I'm going to eyeball it that the halfway point is about here, like so, and I'm going to fold this along that halfway line. And I'm going to have a look at which side I prefer. I think this side is more rounded and nicely edged, so I'm going to cut to this shape here. Let's have a look at the shape we have. We now have a perfectly symmetrical pot, side to side, edge to edge. Now I'd like to get the same symmetry in this top piece here. So I'm going to actually trim off this piece so that it matches my sketch. I'm going to come around and I'm going to round out this edge here because it's a nice soft rounded edge. There's my pot, and there's the piece that goes in the top. So can you see how I now have a completely symmetrical pot? That's just a really easy way to do it. The other way to make this part symmetrical is to cut that as well. But before we cut it, I'm actually going to lay this down as a trace. So I have nice thick lines on the back. So I'm just going to come over here, move them down from the edges here because this will actually have some dirt in it. So we won't need to see the base of those touching the pot. And I'm going to trace around it with just broken strokes because I want to be able to erase these lines. So I just want very light, rough, broken lines around the edge, sketchy lines to show me where the pot sits. Okay, so there's our first outline, quite nice and sketchy there. And now I'm going to do the back piece. So the back piece sits in here, like so. And I'm going to sketch that in around the back. So there's our back piece in. Now the other piece that I want to get nice and symmetrical is this rim around here. So the simple way to do that is to cut it out. So I've got it folded back in half. I'm going to cut along this line. And I'm going to trace it. And you can see now I have a perfectly symmetrical pot. You can see it right there, how I've traced all that, put it in, it's all good. We have a nice pot. And there's even enough room left to do a little bit of shading underneath to show some shadow. So everything fits nicely on that piece of watercolour paper, and we're ready to start painting. I like an ultrafine Sharpie for this in black, as it is waterproof once it's dry. And I'm going to draw the lines in now. And you'll see I'm sketching the lines rather than having solid lines, because I do want the pot to read as a quite solid piece, but I want the line work to be more of a sketch pattern. So you can see how I'm deliberately leaving spaces in the lines. I'm being quite confident in my strokes. And there's our pot done. Now I'll let that dry and I'll erase the pencil marks. I think I'd also like to put the dirt in the pot, which is going to be around the back here. And the stems of the flowers will disappear into that pot dirt. So the brushes I'm using today, I have a rather large brush here, a number 8 golden maple with a round head on it. So this is a round watercolour brush, and that's what I'm going to use to draw my pot. And I'm going to start with my light colour, which would be some raw sienna. Then I'm going to bring in burnt sienna for the darker shadows. I'm using my Winsor & Newton field box. You can use whatever watercolour paints you have. Gansai Tambi paints, if you have a set of these. They have some really great colours in them, as you can see, and they are very beginner friendly watercolours. They're sort of a cross between watercolour and a gouache. I love using them. They're very vibrant colours and easy to get started with. So I'm just putting some raw sienna on my palette, and I tend not to clean my watercolour palettes because you can always spray them with a spritzer bottle like this one and reactivate them even after days of being left on the palette. I think it's a great way not to waste your paint by using every last scrap that you have that's still sitting on your palette. Now I'm just going to lay down the first colour and around the back of the pot as well. This will be much darker when I'm finished, but with watercolours you're always adding layers of colour one upon the other to get the consistency of something that's very dark by adding what's called a glaze, which means colour, the same colour or a darker colour over the top. If you use the same colour, you will darken the watercolour. It always dries. I'm going to leave a piece there that is my highlight, because I'm going to imagine the sun is shining in from the front and slightly from this direction. So that's my light source coming this way. So there is a highlight on the pot there. I'm going to leave that to dry. And while it's drying, I'm going to start in on the daisies. This one. And I'm going to bring that in onto my palette. I have some lemon yellow over here, but I'm going to put the Winsor yellow just over to one side. Now, if you didn't have one of these palettes, you can just use a white china plate. That works really well. Okay, and now we're getting into the flowers, and I'm just going to wash the colour over them, because there's a lot of detail in the line work. We're just providing the background colour here, and each of them will be a lovely yellow. And I'm going to bring in some orange colour as well. And it doesn't matter if you go a little bit out the lines, that all adds to the charm of watercolour. This is a loose watercolour painting, even though the image is quite detailed. Sometimes you'll hear this referred to as a line and wash technique, and the line that we're using is an actual stamped line. And it's a really fun way to watercolour. It's No stress. The lines have all been drawn for you. You don't have to think about creating a drawing or a painting. You just colour. Now, while that's drying, I'm going to do some of the leaves, but I'm going to do leaves that aren't touching the flowers because I don't want the colours to bleed. Even though they're bleeding a little bit into the background, and that's perfectly fine. In fact, I'm going to actually add some more intentional yellow in the background because I want to have some splotchy colour in the background of this piece. I don't just want it to be on plain cream watercolour card. Add some splotches over here. Just being very loose, very carefree with how I lay that colour in the background. And some within the centre there that will show, and some around the pot. One of the things I like to keep in mind when I'm creating a painting is I like for the colours to kind of be seen all around the painting. So I want that yellow to travel all around my page, but in a subtle fashion on the edges. And now for the green leaves. Now for this, I'm going to use, because it's green and green can sometimes get a bit muddy, I'm going to use a finer brush. Now this is my Princeton size 4 brush. It comes to a beautiful fine point, and this will help me draw those nice stems. Another tip for watercolor is it works easier if you draw the lines towards you rather than trying to push them away, unless you're doing flicks of stems going up this way. In this particular case, it's easy to draw the lines down. Now you could make your own green with some more of this Winsor yellow and a little bit of perhaps some blue. And I might even show you how to do that because I like the idea of making my own colours and it's easier than you think. So this time I'm going to start with some lemon yellow, which is already on my palette over here. Wet that and add a teeny touch of blue. Now I have ultramarine and Winsor blue, and I think I'm going to go with the Winsor blue, just a few dabs of that. You only need a few. See how nice that colour is? Now it's a very green colour, so I'm going to bring in some more of this colour, which is Payne's Grey. And I have this in a tube and I have it over on my other palette. So I'm going to grab some of that and bring that in and knock the colour back. You can see how that's now a much calmer colour and even a little bit more Payne's Grey. So it's a bit more earthy. And I do like that green. I think that's a really nice green for some of the details in the leaves. So let's start some leaves here. And I'm just going to colour them with a flat wash of colour because there'll be more colour coming back in further down the track. And you can see I'm staying away from those yellows while they're drying. It's fun to make your own greens. I quite like making my own green colour. You just got to make sure that you mix up enough that it will go all around the page, because if you've mixed up a colour once and you run out, that can add to a little bit of heartache because you can't quite get the colour exactly the same the next time you mix. But I have quite a lot of colour there, so that should go all the way around. And the stems are really going to be slightly different green. They are not going to be the same colour. But this is going to dry fairly light. Now, while it's still wet, I want to bring in the darker green, which is my permanent sap green, which is here, and add some contrast. And I'm just keeping in mind that my light source is coming from the front, but anything that's sitting under one of the flowers is going to be a little bit darker too. So here I come in with my darker green. So I'm going to start with just going along some of the leaf. And this isn't too scientific, just you want leaves that have two different shades in them basically. So you can pop it wherever you like really. Just don't cover up what you've just put down. This is more the contrasting shade. So watercolour can be a little scary when you first start. There's a lot of things that are different from working with, say, an acrylic paint or a craft paint. Water control is important. You don't want too much water at first, although the wet on wet technique is wonderful, but that's a more advanced technique because you don't have as much control of the way the paint lays on the paper, and you might get a lot of runs and things that are harder to control. Because I'm using a very fine detail brush, this is working really, really nicely. Okay, so now we need some centers. So let's get a really nice color in the center. And I love my burnt sienna. That's going to come into the pot as one of the darker colors. So I want that color to travel around my painting. So I'm going to come in with burnt sienna, which is this lovely little pot here. These are half pans, by the way, and this is a field box which you can take doing plein air sketching, which I love to do as well. Okay, now I'm going to bring in some of that Payne's grey. In fact, I'll put some over onto this palette so you can watch me mix it, just a teeny amount. It has a lovely kind of blue base to it, which really is a gorgeous colour. I do love my Payne's grey. I'm going to darken that up quite considerably. That's going to be the centres. Now the centres in this picture here, and I can show you this, are like circles. So I'm going to stipple these in with the point of my brush. So I'm just going to dab, 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 like so. And this allows some of that texture to show through rather than just colouring it in one swipe of colour. Now I want this colour to travel, so I'm going to bring some very carefully into the stems, and for this I'm going to switch to my liner brush. I have this 0 brush. And if you feel you're getting too much water on your brush, you can just dab it off on a paper towel. I'm going to bring in the liner with this brown now because I want this to be fairly exact. And I'm going to keep it mainly at the top, underneath each flower. So this will bring in some shadows. I'm going to put some darker there because it has a flower sitting behind it, or a flower stem behind it. And this is going to start giving me some drama. Anywhere this sits directly under a piece or behind a leaf, and a liner brush makes this really easy. Down here we want a bit more. And it's going to contrast as well from foreground to background. Now we want some soil for our pot, and you guessed it, I'm going to use the same colour. I can come back to my bigger brush and bring the same colour in for the dirt in the pot. I have a reasonable amount of water on this because I want to kind of stipple in the colour rather than lay it in a flat pattern. And all this stippling and loose watercolour that we're doing adds to the character of the piece. Right, so there's our dirt in the pot. Now we have a very yellow looking terracotta pot, so we need to bring this back into our beautiful burnt sienna colour. So I'm bringing that in, changing my brush to a bigger brush. And colour away. And I'm taking really big strokes for this. Almost using my brush on the flat side, and this gives me a lovely variance of colour. It's going to be darker right at the bottom of the pot. And underneath this ledge I want it to be quite a solid colour too. Even darken it up a bit more, bring a bit more pigment in. You can see the pot starting to come to life. As we're giving it some shade, we're giving it some different values. And I want the back of the pot to be quite dark because there's not much sun coming through the back of the pot here. It's mainly on the front. And the flowers themselves are casting a shadow. I'm just drawing this directly from the half pan without putting it on my palette. Drawing pure pigment out. Look how nice that is. You can see, even though this is a very large brush, because I'm just using the tip of it, I can be quite accurate with what's happening. And now I'm just going to add a little bit down the very bottom because that's going to be quite dark. And back to my really wide lines. They give the impression that this is a hand-thrown pot, or it's a hand-thrown pot. I'm going to bring in some lines through that piece there. Looking good. And I'm going to very lightly wash some colour through, just so that it's not pure white peeking through. Just a very light wash of almost just plain water there. Fabulous. And I'm going to use the Winsor Yellow, which is a little bit deeper than the lemon. Put that back on my palette. And I'm going to bring a tiny bit of Winsor Red as well, which is this colour here, deeper colour, and that's going to go around the centre, only around the centre, just outside where I did those stippled edges. So almost like a rough circle around there. So what I want to do now is get even darker greens in there. So for that, I'm going to use my ready-made permanent sap green, which is a nice strong colour, and use it pretty much with just a small amount of water and no other colour, and bring that in for my really deep contrasts. And I think that will be some of my bases of the leaves and some of the veins. Remember, this is very loose, so I'm not aiming to colour in every single part of the leaf or have everything perfect. It's a loose watercolour. Just be confident with your lines. If you're a little bit hesitant, that's where it will look as though you've made a mistake. For me, it's just a matter of feeling confident, letting it go outside the lines, being okay with that, and saying, this is art. I don't want it to look pristine. I don't want it to look as though I've coloured it with pencils. I want it to look as though the hand of the artist is in this piece. So there's a nice orange. Look at that. Bit of warmth. This will pick up the colour of the pot again. So this is now going to be the next detail. And this is only going around the tips of the flowers. Just in a ring. So this is bringing in something very close to our pot up into the flowers in the picture. And just this stippling works so well with this stamp set. It's just made for it. You can see how the flowers are really coming to life. Now I want some absolute pink in there somewhere. I'm just thinking it's yellow and it's green. I want some pink, so I'm bringing back that alizarin crimson. And I am letting this blend in with the spots I put on the outside. This is the exciting part. The paint is still wet. I'm just dropping that pigment into the wet paint. You can see how that's brought the flowers immediately to life. Just around the edges of the petals. While it's wet, drop in straight from your pan, very little water because it already has water on it, and see how this colours those daisies and helps them jump off the page. They're really coming forward from the background now with those added colours. And the less water you use and the more pigment you use, the brighter the colour will be. I'm very happy with how that looks. Now I don't want this to be floating, and I'm just going to peel off the bottom tape. There's not a whole lot of water on this, so it hasn't really buckled, but I do want to get a shadow for the pot to sit on. So for that, I'm going to use my darker browns again, which I've just been using. And this time I'm going to add quite a lot of water to it and just but with a lot of water on there. And because I've come in a little bit too close there, I'm going to draw this out with a dry brush. So I'll get my brush, and so a dry brush acts like a vacuum cleaner and picks up the parts that you want to pick up. Now I want this rough because, you know, it's just a sense of there being a shadow, and in fact I want to even go a little bit further behind because the sun is coming from this angle, so I want more of the shadow to be up here. Now I'm going to add some stipple brown into the background, just like dots. Now you could flick this on if you wanted to. You could do spatters if you want to, splatters. I'm not a fan of splatters because they tend to then go all over the flowers themselves. I'm just going to draw this in super lightly. You know, it's just so light. It's just little bits of stipple around the outside. That's a little bit too much there, so I'll pull that out with a dry brush. Anywhere you get too much, get a nice clean brush, dry it off on your paper towel, and then pull it out and it'll come up. It'll take up the colour like that. There we go. If you prefer to spatter, please go ahead and spatter, but I'm going to just carry this very subtly all around the page. And we're done. And I think the last thing I need to do, because this has a lot of black lines, I would actually like to put a black line right in the very center of each flower, just to draw the eye right into the center. This one's facing a bit up, this one's facing a bit up, so I'll put the black line further on top. It's just a small touch, but it draws the eye back into the center of the flowers. That's it, we're done. So I hope you enjoyed that project today. It's great fun to take a stamp and change it so that it is something a little bit different. Another way you could use this stamp, which I think would look fabulous, would be to stamp it one next to the other with perhaps a little bit of masking and make a big long flower bed or a field of flowers, or have this stamped here, mask it off and stamp some more off in this direction. There's so much you can do with the stamp rather than use it exactly as it is. And you can always have fun with watercolor because it's a great medium to use. I love it. I love playing around with watercolor. I love inventing colors. I love mixing all colors, and they're quite different and they're quite interesting. And I just think this is a load of fun. I just can't stop. So I hope you enjoyed that today. I look forward to seeing you again next time. Bye for now.